Hey folks, my name is Gibran,
And I'm Tuesday.
and we are both coaches, and we are also a couple. We spend a lot of time talking about coaching with each other. Coaching is not the only thing that we do. Uh, we are facilitators, consultants. We work with groups. We do healing work together, and we have found a real passion in our coaching work. Anything you would add to that, Tuesday?
Yeah, I think what I would add is, both of us, I think, are kind of unexpected coaches. We've been interested in kind of big shifts in the world, making change in the world, doing good in the world, and doing that with collectives. And so we're a little unexpected in this coaching realm in that we're moving into working with individuals. And it's been so evocative. It's been so rich for the two of us, as in our professional life, but then also personally. And we have these conversations where we help each other out, we kind of coach each other. And so it felt like it could be fun and interesting, and hopefully people will like it if we share some of the conversation we're having with each other, kind of out into the world.
That's right. That's how we're thinking about it. And this is a bit of a test, and we'll see how people respond. And if people like what we're doing, we'll do more of it. You have interviewed me in the past about my approach to coaching, and I have shared that with my community. But this is more of a conversation between us, and what we're using to anchor it are the words of other coaches, and in this case, a specific coach. And do you want to tell us a little bit about her?
Yeah. So we listen to a podcast like everyone else in the world. We are into podcasts. So we listen to a coach named Diana Chapman on the Tim Ferriss podcast. And she is a principal and co-founder of the Conscious Leadership Group. And so, of course, as we do this coaching with other folks, we're interested in hearing from other coaches and what they're doing. And so this podcast was like, oh, she kind of laid out some of what she was doing. And you and I had lots of thoughts. And so we thought, well, let's get on and talk
Yes,
about it with each other.
exactly. And I think we should really probably get into that fairly quickly. If I had anything to say to lay more groundwork, is that we have indeed been doing coaching for a while, but we've been doing it in the context of a larger organizational engagement, right? So if we are working on a fellowship of a leadership fellow, a fellowship for leaders, or if we're working with an organization, we are coaching those senior leaders all the time. It's just that the way we approached it before was we would do the coaching in the context of a larger systems change work. And we still do some of that, but we have found incredible value in doing this individual coaching, or in my case, I'm doing some group coaching where it's still focused on the individual leaders, but I'm also bringing them together to support each other and to build relationships among each other. So it's bringing all the work that we've done in the past into the focus on coaching. And the reason why we're doing this right now is both to test the possibility of whether people want to listen to us talk about coaching, but also because we have openings coming up, right? Our coaching schedules get pretty full, and I think you have a cycle that's about to be done. And me, in the fall, I am reopening the group coaching offering that I opened, that I have been doing, and that people have found really helpful. So we also want to let people know about that, and I'll write more about that in the newsletter with this. But I did want to put that out front.
Yeah, I think that that's really great. And I love that you explained it's an extension of the work that we've been doing, because often I was finding leaders saying, oh, it's so helpful to kind of talk with you. And yeah, so it feels like a really natural extension. And the other thing, we talked about this last night, which I think is so interesting, as my own coaching happens through projects and now with individuals, I'm finding, and I think you found a couple of times, we're even coaching pairs. So it's like individuals, pairs, and groups. And so I'm finding this pairs work really interesting, because folks are talking about a co-leadership model more and more. How do we actually have co-CEOs or co-EDs, or these roles that we actually want to lead together? And so that's been a really interesting bit of new development in folks that I'm coaching.
Yeah, I love when you talk to me about the pairs work that you're doing. Some of the other group work I do sometimes is with leadership teams specifically, right? And
Right.
the reason why I love to work with a leadership team, in which case I'll try to coach each individual in the leadership team, and then the leadership facilitate the leadership team altogether, is because the leadership team has nobody to blame, right? The leadership team
Right.
is specifically responsible for what is happening. Otherwise, they don't belong on that team, right? And
Right.
that threshold of responsibility, I think, is a really important space for the coaching to come in on. Um, the other thing I think it merits mentioning is that this series can be good for people who are doing coaching themselves,
Hmm.
and also people that might not call themselves coaches but have to coach. So somebody in a leadership position
Right.
really is a good leader if they are good coaches to the people that they're leading.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what we also have in mind as we approach this work.
Yeah. I think that's right. If people are looking to you for guidance, leadership, or just your presence in their lives, I hope that this will be helpful to you.
Beautiful. So what would you say about Diana Chapman's work? How would you get us started on that?
So, and there's so much to say, and I'm sure I won't be able to describe all of the things that she said that landed for me. But the first thing I was struck by is as they entered the conversation, she talked about being a stay-at-home mom, which I thought was really fascinating, right? So she is obviously this quite successful coach with like Fortune 500 CEOs. She's doing all this work, and she started her story as being a stay-at-home mom. And part of what I loved about that is and I think part of what I bring when we're working with folks is this idea that you don't know, right? You don't actually know where you're going. What you do is you follow your thread, right? And you don't imagine that because you're here now means you won't ever get there, or that you will get there. Part of it is actually following what's evolving, what's emerging for you. And so this, as a coach, that is absolutely what she did. She just kind of took the next step, which is, of course, all that any of us can do. She was just more articulate and clear about that being her path.
That's great. It's her story about how she came into this is inspiring and feels unexpected, given kind of some of the pre-existing ideas of what a career path would look like.
Exactly.
Something I liked about her too was how she talked about all the influences in her life and the teachers that have guided her, and the people that I'm thinking about most as we speak are it's Gay Hendricks and what's this
Arvel.
Arvel Hendricks. That's the couple, and she talks a lot about them, and they do a lot of couples work together, right?
That's
And so
right.
that's a bit of how she got into this work, right? She went to a larger workshop along this kind of human potential movement uh, work, right? And that was a key shift for her, and she keeps referring back to the people that have taught her, and I find that really important, because of course you and I refer back to the people that we learn from, people that have inspired us, people that have mentored us, and it seems that that's such an important part of getting good at any craft.
Absolutely. I really appreciate when people kind of honor those folks that they've learned from. And for me, part of that was also her weaving of her personal life, right? Which I think she said at some point, like, my marriage needed help. I went to this place, right? And that's where she found her professional life. And she talked about her marriage throughout the interview. And so part of what that brings for me, and I think that in the sessions, folks often want to talk about their professional life. That might be how they come to us, talking about their professional life. But of course, their personal life is just deeply woven into that. And so this idea of not wanting to, pry or get into people's personal lives for the heck of it, but actually that those things we compartmentalize so well, or we think we compartmentalize so well, right? but it's actually impacting. And so in the coaching relationship, I want to know how the rest of your life is going as well, because it absolutely impacts how you're showing up at work, and it matters. And you know, my early training was as a psychotherapist. Now we talk about internal family systems, but before that, there was just like family systems theory, which was radical in that it said that what happens in one part of the family impacts the other part of the family. And we know that in larger systems change, and leaders see that in their offices. How they show up really matters, and how they show up, it has impacted and impacts how they are at home. And so the coaching relationship isn't as neat as come to me for a coach about what's happening in your office and your leadership dynamics. It's actually what's happening with you and what's happening in the rest of your life too.
That's right. And I think maybe moving away from Diana for a second, that is something that we were just talking about yesterday, which is something common in our approach, is this belief or this understanding of both integrity and integration, right? And so we've talked about how life is, I think about the industrial age, right, as compartmentalizing life. This is where you work. This is where you worship. This is where you're a family person, right? And so this is where you are with your friends. And it's all separate compartments. And people try to function in this machine-like system by taking parts of themselves, taking themselves apart. And so much of what we're trying to do is to bring our parts back together, right? And so much of the inner conflict that we find ourselves in and that we find our clients in comes from this not being integrated. That's why we're in so much conflict with ourselves, right? Or we're in big conflict with parts of ourselves that we don't like, that tend to exhibit behavior that gets us into trouble. And so we try to exile those parts of ourselves, or we try to not have certain feelings. And so we talk a lot about how in our approach, we're helping people both come into integration with themselves and how essential that is to moving in the world as someone that has integrity.
Right. And to bring it back to Diana Chapman, I feel like that is what, throughout the interview, she continued to model. This was not a person who was afraid of any part of herself, right? And when it felt right, she would share it, or she might talk about her coaching practice, but there was no kind of delineation. Now I'm going to talk about me. Now I'm going to talk about my coaching. Now I'm going to, this was a person who was well integrated. And I think that that's what we begin to see in those folks we seek out, in the leaders we want, and the coaches we want. We want to see that integration, that seamless kind of like moving between all of the parts of their life as an integrated being. And I think that she was a great example of that. I thought, her manner was just deeply okay with herself.
Yes. Yeah, she definitely had that. And also a lot of honesty about when I'm working on this,
Yeah.
We didn't project some kind of I've landed here.
Right.
And I think it keeps connecting to her work when she has this whole section with her, and she actually walks Tim through it. And I like this so much about Tim Ferriss. It's like he puts himself in the hands of the healers or therapists, of coaches that he's working with, and he does that with some honesty, with a lot of honesty.
Yeah.
And there's this part where she starts talking about a full body yes. And what's coming to me, which maybe it's not said explicitly in the interview, is that in order to know your yes and your no and your ambivalence, there has to be some sense of what your integrity is, right? Of what you're aiming for. Because, for example, next week I will be facilitating the Evolutionary Leadership Workshop. And the workshop is for people to take a dream in their head and make it real in the world. And so there is a lot of inquiry into what is it that you want? What is it that you desire, right? However, we often think we want something that's not what we want, right? Because
Often.
society tells us this is what you should want, right? Like for many
Yeah.
people, it can be I want I want a house, I want 2 kids, I want a dog, I want a picket fence, and then I'm gonna be happy, right? And that's by the time you get to midlife, you have all of those things, and you're not happy, right? And so, but you thought you wanted those things, right? So there is something there. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that, about how she gets to the yes and the no. I think it's a tool that you and I use often with each other, right?
Right.
When we try to say, try to come up with an answer to a choice point in our lives. You will help me find my yes and my no, and I'll help you find your yes and your no. And there was something a little bit different to how she did it. So I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Sure. I love the whole body yes. And the no and the ambivalence. For me, it was the ambivalence piece that she really added. So, we work with the idea, number one. So Gibran just said, often, we think we know what we want, right? But we don't actually, we're just kind of going after what culture has told us we want, or our parents have told us we want, or we think we should want. And so sometimes you can't always trust, right? What you think you want. But what you can trust is your body.
Yeah.
And so that's where this whole body yes and no and ambivalence comes in, because your body will not lie to you. And so we use this practice of actually asking your body to answer a question for you, right? Rather than going right to the mind, because often our mind has thought through every angle and every way, and we're just starting to spin, or at least my mind starts to spin. Maybe other people's doesn't, but my mind starts to spin. And so actually there isn't a right answer through the mind.
Right.
But the body often knows. And so she takes Tim through this process of imagining something he is fully a yes to, something that without qualm or without consideration, he just is a yes. Mm-hmm. And rather than kind of like, oh, how do you feel when you have that yes? It's like actually sink down into your body and feel, what are the sensations? What do you notice? What's the air? What do you, when you have a yes, what does it feel like with your body? And it's like, not just, it's like what's a hell yes, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then what's a no? So something that you're really clear, not this today. No, no, no. Right. And then the same thing, listen to your body and how it gives you that no, right? Because your mind will often give a quick no, but your body might do something entirely different, right? With the no, right? And then she then pushes further and says it moves to ambivalence, right? Yes. Like something you're not as clear about, a yes or a no. And I think her position is that if it's not a whole body yes, it's actually a no.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you need to know that ambivalent yes or no, like that kind of, like if your whole body yes is a yes and your no, your heck no is a no, then your ambivalence might be like, but that's actually a no. That's actually a no. And so moving into your body, she did it more deeply than I've ever seen it be done, that like moving between the yes and the no. Yeah. And then moving to the ambivalence. Yeah. And I want to say, I love that. And I think you can do it in dramatic situations, right? Should I take this job? Should I not take this job? What, like the big ones. But the practice of it is actually, do I want eggs for dinner? And just like ask your body, right? And so it's like this practice of beginning to let your body or listening to your body and understanding what your body's heck yeah, no, and ambivalence is. And then actually trusting to move from it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And the ambivalence, she calls it a subtle no, right? So there's a clear no and there's a subtle no. And I think a lot of what's important there is our minds will override our bodies a lot, right? And I know a lot of folks that are doing a means to an end something with their lives, right?
Right.
I am doing this job now, even though I don't like it, and I'm forcing myself to do it because I'll get a good retirement, or because
Right.
then I'll have enough money and enough safety to do whatever I want. And that's a very powerful story. And something I will say is questions of privilege do come in, right? And
Of course.
there are people in their social hierarchical social ladder that don't have an option but to do whatever job they
Right.
but there's a fair number of people that are making bank and afraid of what will happen if they listen to themselves. So one thing that I do when I'm inviting people to find their yes and their no is I assure them that they have no obligation to act on it, right?
Right.
Just so that they can
Right.
find the answer.
Right.
But that both you and I have experienced in our lives, um, how many rewards there are to following your yes, and we have both experienced and might even be experiencing being in some places where we are actually ambivalent about, but we feel like we are in bondage to that for whatever reason. uh, but I feel like something in us, we are honest with each other, where we know that the changing of the situation has to happen, right? That there's
Yeah.
something about it that has to shift. And I think this also works not just with things that we think are going to make us comfortable or safe, but sometimes it also works with things where our mind tells us this is supposed to be the right thing to do. So I for example, recently, and you helped me a lot through this, and I really wrestled there, right? I was involved in a collaboration that on something quite meaningful to me. And there was something relationally that just wasn't working, right? And I was kept wondering if by walking away, I was walking away from something that might be difficult, but was meant to change me or grow me in some way, or if I was walking away because it was no longer right for me, or it's not right for me in this period. And I really wrestled that down because I was really concerned about walking away from something that is supposed to be difficult.
Right.
And and sometimes that's true. But to go back to somebody other than Diana Chapman, to maybe our favorite coach, um, Martha Beck, right? She says, when you're in integrity, you can say yes to something that will be really hard, maybe like the hardest thing you've ever done. And there's still the tension of hardest in front of you, but there's some relief in your body because that hard thing is actually an integrity with yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you experienced that, right? When we did the yes, no, right? Even though you might have taken what was the harder choice, almost immediately you felt relief.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something that this is part of why all of this is a practice. We have to practice trusting ourselves and trusting our bodies, right? Which is why I say do it for things like, what do you want to have for dinner? So that you can trust it in small ways, so that when the big things come up, you have some trust and you're like, oh, I do feel more relaxed. I don't know how I'm going to do that thing, but I feel more relaxed. And I think you can, to your point earlier, I really, really appreciate your saying that, because I I talk with my clients about, like, when we just tell the truth to ourselves, right? We don't have to act on it, but the knowledge is important,
Yeah.
right? And so I like that you kind of give your clients permission just to know
Right.
whether it's a yes or a no to them. And it doesn't mean that sometimes we don't actually have to do our no's even, let alone our ambivalences. But when we go in knowing that, then we begin to trust ourselves. We see things different. We experience things differently. And so it occurs to me that a lot of both our orientation to coaching, but what I heard with Diana as well, is a deep trust in people, right?
Yes.
To do what is best for them, and to know that that will be best for others, right? It's not a hedonistic do whatever you want. It's like when you actually move from that place of truth and integrity, it will be good for you, of course, but it will be good for others.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so there's something, I think, that, some of her ideas felt a little, or could feel a little like, oh, just go with your whole body yeses. Your creative energy is like what you want to follow and play, and these things that she said, that I think that if you don't trust yourself and don't trust people, can feel quite dangerous.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
When they come from a foundation of actually, that's how we do good in the world, it's just a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. I mean, and she specifically, I mean, she names the connection between Eros and the creative life force, right? And so we're talking about bodies, and we're talking about yeses, and we're talking about what you want. And I think a lot of us have been trained to distrust that Eros, right? Because and I get why. I can get, like, there's this very subtle line where the Eros can become can lead to some kind of escapism, right?
Right.
But that creative life force that's awake inside of us, that we feel in our bodies, I believe that when we are, and I've experienced that when we're cleaned up enough, right, from when we're in integrity,
Right.
and by cleaned up, I don't mean it as a moralism, right?
Right.
But I feel like the more I have come into integrity with myself, the more I can trust the Eros inside myself to come out in the world cleanly, right? And not necessarily sexually, right? Though that can be included, the sensual can be included, but it all feels more clean as I have come into bolder and clearer integrity with myself, right? And I think the path to you and I becoming a couple, right, was a path of following a path to integrity, and that's been it's more rewarding than almost anything else in life.
That's right. That's right. And so this energy that we've been taught to kind of fear, right, because it will go out of control or make us out of control, can actually be an incredible vehicle for our creativity in the world and our expression in the world. And I can't imagine anyone listening to this doesn't want to make the world better, right? So, that this idea that it is through pleasure, that is through creativity, that it is through Eros, that we can actually create the world we want, is pretty radical, and is based on this idea that we can trust ourselves, right? And many of us haven't been allowed to trust ourselves, right? We kind of from a young age are taught, like, this is what it looks like to be who you are. This is what it looks like to be successful. And so sometimes I think that my coaching is quite simply just bringing people back to their knowing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Knowing who they are, and then moving from that place, knowing who you are, and then moving from that place. And it sounds really simple, and in essence it is, but we need a lot of tools to do that, right? Because there's been a lot placed on us that moves us away from who we are. And so that getting back to that knowing and then trusting that you can move from that place is a pretty radical shift.
That's right. That's right. I love that. And it's amazing in these coaching situations to watch the person that you're coaching light up as they come in touch with their more authentic self, you know. Um, we only have a couple of minutes, and I was hoping we could touch on two things. She starts with the drama triangle, which is such an important tool. Maybe before we get to it, a very practical tool that felt new to me in my own toolbox was the tool of exaggerating feeling or a situation, right? So I am feeling bothered by something. Something is just kind of getting in my way. That's why I'm going to coaching. There's a relationship, a work situation, a role, a recurring dynamic in my life. And so the idea of taking that feeling and blowing it up, right, out of proportion, way beyond what you're actually feeling, does two things. It allows you to take a closer look at it, and it actually brings some lightness and playfulness into it, right? Because if I am just really bothered by an annoying what is a simply an annoying behavior, but it's triggering something deeper for me. If I can act it out, right? If I can get the client to blow it up and just like, I don't know, act really bothered or throw a fit or just kind of fully express that sensation, it gets them to understand it better. And that's an element of playfulness to that situation. And I think that tool is a lot of fun to use.
Right. Yeah, I love that because, and we do it naturally as human beings through our humor, right? You know, when we tease each other and exaggerate, but this idea that actually you can go in, like you feel a little frustrated, let's go in. Let's be like full on rageful about this thing, right? Just gives you a little, number one, it often lets you know that your frustration is actually deeper than you're owning, right? It actually is maybe a little bit closer to that rage, but then like when you shine the light of rage on it, you're like, oh, you know, you just get some distance and it becomes more of just being a human being with all sorts of foibles, with all sorts of drama and all sorts of, you know, like we're just like, that's just who we are, right? And instead of feeling locked into this like intense feeling that you don't want to be having, right? Because often you're fighting yourself about having it too. That's the other thing that exaggeration does. It breaks that pattern of I'm having this feeling, I don't want to have this feeling. So I just deny I'm having this feeling, I don't want to have it. You know, like that shouldness of feelings, it gives permission to just move in. And so, you know, we're infinitely creative once we get a little space from something. And so I think that play gives us a little bit of space and I like it a lot. And it's just fun. It's also like, it's just fun, which is also like kind of cool, right?
Essential. I think essential to the work that we're doing, you know, to have to find the fun in it. And play. Did you want to talk at all about the drama triangle before we close?
Well, I mean, yes. And then I think it's so useful. So the drama triangle she talks about, I think it's Karpman is his name, it's Karpman, the drama triangle, which is victim, villain, or hero rescuer.
Right.
And it's like, we get into these situations, sometimes internally, but often with other folks where we cast them in a role, which means we're in a role, or they cast us in a role. And so this idea that often we are colluding to be part of this triangle, we're saying, yeah, I'll be the victim here, or I'll be the villain, which assigns blame, even if it's self-blame, or I'll be the hero rescuer. And often our ego is really deeply tied into which of those three roles that we're in any given situation. And the drama triangle says, oh, look at the role I'm playing here. And do I want to do that? Have I agreed to this? And if not, how do I try to move myself out of that triangle where I'm saying, no, I won't be a victim here, but I also refuse to be a villain, but I'm also not going to just rescue everybody. And how do we begin, like those three roles, and we often in the same situation move between them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how do we say, oh, I see that. Again, it's just a little bit of space. I see that. And actually, I don't want to, none of those roles is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And something about it that I found, sometimes you gotta listen or to something. We've even taught this in situations, and then you get a deeper layer of it. And I felt like listening to this podcast, and I heard it more than once preparing for a conversation, and you and I talked about it, is I got at a deeper level how what you want is out of the whole triangle.
Right.
And because I can imagine saying, well, the hero rescuer really can feel like a good place to be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of them can feel like a good place to be in a way. Right? You don't want to call yourself a villain, but there's something super seductive about being the victim, because you're quite innocent,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe an exercise of power in being the villain. And so there's the idea that that what you want to do is get out of the whole triangle. Felt very powerful, and I think the drama triangle is a great lens to work with in yourself, but it's important to name that it's having a powerful role in the way culture and society is playing out.
Yeah.
We are trying to make sense of the chaos, of the crisis of belonging, of the crisis of meaning, of
Mm-hmm.
the structures of oppression. We're trying to make sense of it through the lens of this triangle, and we are
Mm-hmm.
very far, but
Yeah.
we're quite attached to it. And so what
Yeah.
power it would be for more of us to intentionally step away from the triangle and look at things more clearly.
Right. I love that. I really appreciate that, because I was thinking about it both internally, but also just like in small groups, like you said, in leadership teams or in pairs that I worked with. You can see that. But you're right. This is actually, it's a fractal. We're playing it out definitely much bigger. And what if we just decided that's actually not the dynamic we want to be in? We actually say, no, I refuse to kind of put this group here and this group here and this group here. What becomes more possible when we begin to step out of that? I love that. I hadn't thought about it at that level. I'm really appreciating that. So, and I use that triangle, right? Just so people can begin to see like, oh, I am just totally bought into this way of looking at the world. And I'm enacting it. And I think it's really useful for folks to just hear it and see it. And I really, she used it very specifically and emphatically, and she could use it to have people kind of shine the light back on themselves, right? Like, what am I doing here, right? Even if it, like you said, even if it feels good and there's a lot of payoff, right? What am I doing here that still continues that dynamic? So, yeah.
Really good stuff. Love talking about this stuff. And this is just a little glimpse into conversations that we have all the time, and so it's a pleasure to do it in public. And yeah, let's see how people, you all that are listening, how you all like it. And if you like it, we'll do more. And
we got stuff to say.
That's right. And people to talk about, great coaches to talk about, that we've been learning a lot from. And so that's part of why we're doing this. We want to support other coaches. We want to support leaders who are doing coaching. You have some spots opening up in your coaching docket, which doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. This is a great time. I'm thrilled we're doing it right now, because I'm moving into opening a new coaching cycle. So I'd love to see people.
And I'm also opening people in September. I'm intending to run a coaching program. The coaching program is every individual in the group will get the same individual coaching that anybody that just joins me as an individual gets, but they will also participate in a group coaching project. They will coach each other. There will be peer coaches in a group process that I facilitate. And so it's more intensive than the one-on-one coaching package, but also more transformational. It's a 10-week process. You'll learn more about it, but that's a big reason why I wanted to do this now, so that people can start signing up for this group process.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Thank
Let us
you.
know what you think.
Yeah, please do. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Love you immensely with all my heart.